Hi, everybody, it's Weird Wink Wilkinson laughing and scratching at you. How's everybody doing today? I got a little bit of a stiff neck. Let me just fix this up. Oh, that feels a lot better. Well, I got a great show for you today with some wonderful weird stuff. I feel so very weird.
There are some things in this world that go way beyond human understanding. Things that cannot be explained, things that most people don't want to know about. That is where we come in.
No human being would stack books like this.
I have come here to chew bubblegum and kick ass. I'm all out of bubblegum.
Well, it looks like you're the one who needs to be taught a lesson, pal. Class is paying 101. The instructor's Casey Jones.
Look, I don't want to fight you.
Well, tough rocks, pal.
Do you want some coffee, Mr. Tully?
Do I?
Yes, have some.
Yes, have some.
It's a cup of coffee in the big time, yeah. Cup of coffee in the big time.
Hey, what do you say we both be independent together, huh?
I guess one person can make a difference. Enough said.
We have the tools, we have the talent. It's Miller time.
Luminous being so we, not this fruit matter.
Empty your mind. Be formless, shapeless, like water. Now you put water into a cup, it becomes the cup. You put water into a bottle, it becomes the bottle. You put it in a teapot, it becomes the teapot. Now water can flow, or it can crash. Be water, my friend.
You, me, or nobody is gonna hit as hard as life. But it ain't about how hard you hit. It's about how hard you can get hit and keep moving forward. How much you can take and keep moving forward. That's how winning is done.
Hey, these aren't my rules. Come to think of it, I don't have any rules.
Well, that's great. Either I have a monster in my kitchen or I'm completely crazy.
I don't think you're crazy.
You know something? Maybe I am insane. Maybe I am insane.
Pizza dude's got 30 seconds.
Rise to the top, oh yeah.
That's the nicest thing a dog can say about anybody.
Human sacrifice, dogs and cats living together, mass hysteria.
Enough, I get the point.
You know what you need? You need a Brazilian plastic surgeon.
I've got one that can see.
Sometimes it happens, someone has to deal with it, and who are you gonna call?
It's showtime.
All right, welcome to Comic Book Radio, everybody. How's it going? I'm your host, Peter Cimetti. This is episode 239. Today, my guest coming back for a second time. He must have liked it the first time. I enjoyed having him on, so I'm glad he's here. That's James SZUBSKI. He's on here for Paranormal Activity in the Columbia River Gorge. We got to a lot the first time when he was on here, but not everything. I don't think we'll get to everything tonight either. So maybe we'll have to come back for a third time. But we're going to get to a bit more today in this hour to come. Before I bring him on, let me introduce... let me say hello to you in the chat. I'm not going to introduce him yet. We got What Geeks Do Network here. It says, hey, Pete, excited for the show. Thank you for being here. Appreciate that. We got Randy Scribner in the house. How's it going, Randy? We got Brian here, too. What's up, Brian? Ben is in the chat too. How's it going, Comics for Life? Hope you're doing good. What's up, Rex Doom? Hope you're doing well. We got Shrek here too. How's it going, Shrek? And Comics for Life giving a hello to the chat as well. All right, so before I get started, this is actually incorrect. Blood Moon is at 95% funded now. 95% funded with just 15 days left. Back it today on alternacomics.com/bloodmoon, or you can go to Indiegogo to check that out. Now, one other thing I want to mention, Alternaween is over. It's over. That's it. If you missed it, next year. So the Alternaween bundles, they are all shipping out tomorrow. If you missed out, I'm sorry. Next year, though. All right. That's it for me for updates. We got James coming on here in just a second, so give him a big Comic Book Radio welcome. It's his second time back on here, so if you're at home, a round of applause or a woo, 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 whatever it is that you do out there. A big Comic Book Radio welcome for the two-time James SZUBSKI. What's up, James?
Hey, how you doing? Good to see you again.
Good to see you, man. I had a wonderful conversation with you the last time you were on here, and it was just, I got people messaging me about it. They really were interested in all the stuff you were talking about. It was great, so I'm really looking forward to this one.
I'm excited to be back. Excuse me. We've got, a whole bunch of new reports. We're now up to well over 360 reports in the store, and we've got, I've been doing some deeper research. We talked about Hanford last time, and I uncovered some new stuff about that. And it's just wild, the things that were going on out there. And then also a lot of really interesting ghost stories have shown up, which Halloween's a great month to talk about that. So tons of stuff to get into.
Yeah, there's so much activity in that region. Before we dive in, can you give like a brief background on yourself and also a little bit about that region specifically, the Columbia River Gorge?
Sure. Yeah. So I have been my wife and I, about three and a half years ago, we inherited a little adventure store in the Columbia River Gorge. Now, the gorge forms the border between Washington State and Oregon State in the Pacific Northwest. And the Columbia River is the largest river to flow into the Pacific Ocean in North or South America. And this gorge is one of the most stunningly beautiful places in the world. But what we are discovering, it is also the most active paranormal hotspot in North America. And just a couple of proof points on that. Washington State is the #1 state for UFO sightings per capita in the country. It is the #1 state for Bigfoot sightings in the country per capita. And Washington State is a hotspot, the gorge is a hotspot within Washington State. Way back in 1968, one of the counties in the gorge passed the world's first Bigfoot protection legislation because there have been so many sightings out here. If you kill a Bigfoot in Skamania County and the coroner determines that it's a humanoid, you will be charged with manslaughter. And so it's a pretty serious thing out here. And the stories go way back. We have most folks are familiar with the Kenneth Arnold story in terms of UFOs. Kenneth Arnold, back in June 1947, flying a private plane over the Cascade Mountains, saw 9 strange craft. The media picked them up and called them saucers. They weren't exactly saucer-shaped. He saw them flying between Mount Rainier to Mount Adams, and he was able to clock their speed based on those 2 landmarks, far in excess of anything else that any civilian or military aircraft at the time. And so the Mount Adams is right in my backyard. It is 25 miles north of me. And so literally the very first the event that ignited America's love affair with flying saucers happened right here in the gorge. And the gorge was created by these truly cataclysmic forces. First, there was this gigantic flood of lava that so much lava poured out of this giant fissure in the earth in the Idaho-Washington border that if you had evenly distributed across the United States, it would bury the whole U.S. in 60 feet of lava. But it concentrated in the Columbia River Gorge. And then some of your folks may be familiar with Graham Hancock's work with the Younger Dryas floods. Well, that happened literally on top of my store. And so there was this giant, during the Ice Age, there was this huge, they say there's a gigantic lake held back by an ice dam. It catastrophically collapsed, created the greatest flood ever known to mankind. And humans were living in the area at the time. But there was a wall of water that washed across Washington State, 300 feet high. It got caught up at the end of the gorge. In places like where my store is, that water was constrained and the depth got to be close to 1,000 feet. And it absolutely ravaged anything that was in the way. But it's an area that is literally carved by these titanic epic biblical forces. And now it is a geologic anomaly. Back in the 80s, it became America's first national scenic area, which basically means it enjoys many of the protections you see with the national park, but people can live here and have businesses. But we have close to 600 caves in the area. There are waterfalls that are 500-600 feet tall.
Are a lot of those caves like lava tube type caves?
Many of them are. Some of them are vault caves. And, we've had some weird reports coming out of some of those places. The western half of the gorge is like this mysterious, brooding, sort of moody Pacific Northwest rainforest with towering trees and moss-covered rocks, the whole 9 yards. But the east side, where the mountain rain shadow is a high plains desert, and it is like austere and beautiful and spiritual. And no trees grow there, and so we've got desert mesas and petroglyphs on the rocks, and these vast expanses. And so I often think about it. If it was a video game, it would be the coolest open world map you'd ever seen. I mean, there's just no end to the types of adventure that you could have out here. And
they should make it a game where you're like Bigfoot,
Totally.
And you got to do various tasks.
Yeah. So the gorge itself is basically at sea level, the river, but within half a mile you can be at 3,000 feet. My home itself, we're a mile from the river, and we're at 800 feet. And so obviously different areas, but the cliffs are just astonishing. And many of them are made up of these columnar basalt columns. So some of your folks may have seen like the Giant's Causeway in England, those big hexagonal stone columns. Well, that's what many of the cliff walls around here look like. And it's just a place of really, there's so many mysteries. We've got stories of UFOs, Bigfoot. There's this thing called the Klickitat ape cat that we talked about last time. Ghost stories, little people, a whole range of mutant creatures around here.
You said small humanoids last time that have been spotted.
Yeah. And so in fact, with all of that crazy geology, when you look at the navigational maps that are issued by NOAA, the government, they explicitly state on there in bright pink letters, there are warnings, say warnings, your magnetic compass readings will be off in this area. So the whole place is riddled with magnetic anomalies. And so my wife and I, we inherited this store, and right away, people started coming in and confiding in us with their stories of strange things that they were experiencing. Like I said, Bigfoot and UFOs and stuff like that. And I was fascinated by all that. So we put up a big sign in the window that said, "File your paranormal reports here." And I gave my employees instructions, said, we're going to believe the witness. We are going to take these people seriously, no matter how outlandish their story sounds. We're going to treat them with dignity and respect. We're going to hear them out. We're not going to try to impose what we believe they saw on their story. And let's just see what kind of data we get. And I really didn't know where it was going to lead, or if many people would show up, or who would confide in us. But lo and behold, here we are, over 360 reports later. And for me, I mean, you can imagine, like 3 times a week, a new Scooby-Doo mystery walks through our front door. And we have these really cool conversations with ordinary people who've had extraordinary experiences. And
is everything okay over there? Did you just hear that?
I think my daughter is in the background.
Oh, okay. You never know.
Like, talk about a Sasquatch encounter she had, I guess.
I was like, all right, we're going to get one tonight.
Yeah. So, and it's really been mainstream science has really sort of pigeonholed a lot of this unusual phenomenon. And they have reasons to do that. I mean, their reputations are bound up in it. Their funding is bound up in it. They've got sort of a group think about these kind of things, and you can be ostracized from your social groups. And so there's a lot of cost to a scientist to take some of this stuff seriously. And the folks that have really taken a beating. But what that means is that folks like us, what I would call citizen scientists, who, our stores are successful, And so, I'm able to fund myself, and I'm not worried about whether someone's going to yank my funding or not. And we have the ability to explore these things with this sort of unfettered field. Like, we can really dive in. And to me, that's one of the neatest and most fun parts about it, is like, here's this whole vast array. It's like back in the Victorian era, and they're experimenting with electricity and all these different kind of forces that people didn't quite understand. It seemed like magic. It seemed insane. I mean, there's Benjamin Franklin out there flying a kite in a lightning storm. Like, his neighbors must have thought he was a total whack job, right? But what he was doing was he was recognizing that there is phenomenon out there that we don't yet understand. And he was bold enough and smart enough to take it seriously and look into it. And it's because of the work of smart pioneers like him that our understanding of the world has expanded to, and now it's a part of everyday life. And that's what's exciting to me about this, is that we have the opportunity to dig in, and we're not bumping elbows with dudes in lab coats. We get to really conduct the actual investigations and, interact with these people and have these meaningful contacts. Some of the folks that talk to me, like, they may have told, like, this one guy had an experience 30 years ago, saw a Sasquatch through his hunting rifle scope. His brother was in the next clearing over, and he scooped him up and said, time to get the hell out of here, and they left. And it took him 2 years to work up the courage to tell his brother about this experience. And his brother told him he was on crack and he was crazy. And for 30 years, he didn't tell anyone else about it. But he was clear that he had had this experience. It was real, and it wasn't something he had made up. I mean, he had an excellent scope on his rifle, and he could see clearly the irises of the eyes of the Sasquatch creature, the hair on its neck, the no hair on its face. And he called me as the second person in the world he had ever told. And, like, what an honor to have earned that level of respect. And what we're able to do now with the amount of data that we have is we can start to see some patterns, some locations that seem to be, where things happen more than others, and some things which sound completely like whacked, like, no way, like, I have no frame of reference for that. All that doesn't make any sense. For instance, the first time I heard someone talking about seeing floating pyramids, I was like, I have no understanding of what that could possibly be or how that could manifest in our world. Mm-hmm. But, we take these people seriously, and we listen to the reports. And, the first one that was kind of a weird one-off. Don't know what to make of it. Well, now I've had 5 reports, different people, different locations. And it turns out that there's quite a few people have seen that same thing. On
floating pyramids?
Yes. It sounds like the weirdest thing. But one of my local friends, he is a remote viewer. And I don't know if you know anything about remote viewing. It was a technique developed by the CIA in the 80s.
Oh, yeah.
And basically, there's a scientific process by which a trained person can be given a target. They don't know what their target is. They're given a target number, and they focus on that. And then through a particular process, they write down what impressions they're getting. And no one is exactly sure how it works, but what many people are certain of is that it is effective, right? Like, this guy that I know, he was a psychic spy. He worked with NASA. He worked with counterterrorism. He even had a company that would work with venture capitalists and give them intelligence on investments they're considering making. Very successful at it. And like I said, hard to say exactly how it works. There's a lot of theories, but we don't know for sure. But what you can't argue with are the results. And typically the way that it's used is that you use it to get a lead. So, like, where do we start looking is often the question. And then once you kind of can narrow the search field, then you begin to apply more scientific methods of verifying what has been viewed. That's a long way to the bank to tell you about what his remote viewers saw with this pyramid on Mount Adams. So there's a place out here called ECETI Ranch. ECETI stands for Enlightened Contact with Extraterrestrial Intelligence. And for a number of decades, a gentleman by the name of James Gilliland has been inviting people onto his property, and they go out there and they watch UFOs fly around Mount Adams. People come from all over the world. Many come as skeptics, and they leave believers. And their YouTube channel and website, SZUBSKI.org, has many videos of some of the phenomena that people see. Oftentimes, it's manifested as these lights that will separate and fly in different patterns, and then congeal back together. Oftentimes, it seems like they are responding to the conscious thoughts of the viewers. A lot of strange stuff going on there. But like I said, there's really clear night vision type footage of it. Well, they captured this glowing pyramid structure on the side of the mountain. And my psychic spy friend, he teaches classes in this thing, and he will have, oftentimes, as he's training folks, he'll give them a target. And, they don't know what they're looking at. They just know the number of the target. And he's assigned that number elsewhere to this particular image of this glowing pyramid on Mount Adams. And he's had about 50 people remote view it, whether they be students or professionals or his colleagues. And everyone is coming back with this message that this is a portal, a stargate, some type of doorway to another dimension. And it's really remarkable because none of these people have talked to each other. The target they may have received before might have been the Eiffel Tower or Niagara Falls or whatever it is. And then this one is sort of randomly mixed into their targets. What do you see? And over 50 remote viewers have seen the same thing. And they use almost biblical or archaic terms to talk about it. They talk about chariots. A lot of times when they do remote viewing on UFOs, they hear things like craft or vehicle or ship or something like that. But when they're looking at this one, they hear things like chariot or vimana, which is the Sanskrit term for flying vehicles. And so if this is, remote viewing, you can question it, and you'd be right to do so. If we don't understand how it's working, it would make sense. But when 50 random people are having the same response to the same target, and they're all talking about a stargate or a portal to a higher dimension, you have to wonder what's going on. And then we've had thousands of people see UFOs flying around Mount Adams. And it seems as though there are these angelic beings that are guarding this portal or stargate or whatever it is. And so I've had, like I said, I had a couple of reports of someone seeing a floating pyramid. Sometimes it's associated with a sunset or something like that. And, I scratch my head. I'm like, okay, well, we'll put that in the books and see if we get any more reports about it. And then lo and behold, another person will come by 4 months later, obviously not knowing that I've had any reports about floating pyramids. And we'll get a similar report and a similar report. And then I talked to my psychic spy friend about it. And he said, yeah, well, we've been looking at that phenomenon too. And here's the videotape from SZUBSKI that shows this glowing pyramid on Mount Adams. And this is what my remote viewers are seeing about it. It's just fascinating. And again, I don't have any idea what the hell is going on. I'm not saying that I'm certain that this is a portal to or a stargate to some heavenly realm. But geez Louise, there is a body of evidence that's gathering that's pointing in that direction. And so right now, that area of the mountain is closed down due to some fires. But we have plans to get out there and check it out next spring.
Now, as far as that stuff goes, the electromagnetic forces that are out there, you said that there's all kinds of fluctuations and anomalies and things like that. Do you believe that the EMF out there, is that causing people to hallucinate things, or is that causing these anomalies in addition to what's going on, or is it like both things also occurring at the same time and maybe giving people even more to work with?
It's a fascinating question. I've looked into it, and so it turns out that they have proven scientifically, peer-reviewed, mainstream science, there's no question about this, that our brains contain magnetite crystals. In fact, in certain structures, they're highly concentrated, like the temporal lobes, hippocampus, things like that. And it's estimated that we have over 5 billion magnetite crystals in every one of our brains. They're housed in structures called magnesomes. They're basically sheath-like structures that sit alongside of a brain cell. And these magnetite crystals, which are amongst the most magnetically reactive substances on Earth, are stacked in these magnesomes. And when you encounter a magnetic field, those magnesome stacks torque and they exert an influence on the brain cells. Now, back in the late 80s, early 90s, a professor named Dr. Michael Persinger out of Laurentide University up in Ontario, Canada, studied how magnetic fields can impact human cognition. And what he was discovering, he created this thing that the media wound up calling the God helmet. It was basically a motorcycle helmet with solenoids on it, and he could manipulate magnetic fields. And it wasn't so much about the strength of the field, it was about cycling through them. And it's sort of like, it doesn't matter how strong it is, it matters the content of that magnetic field. For instance, if you're just yelling at somebody, blah, there's no information being transferred. But you can whisper to somebody, hey, I think your shoelace is untied. And that it doesn't have to be a strong signal, but it's an information-rich signal. And so he was discovering that he could induce paranormal-like perceptions in his subjects consistently, repeatably, and in a way that could be reviewed by his peers. And, they could do the same experiments and get the same results. And he was finding things like many people had a sensed presence, like there was something else there with them. And in fact, a few folks claimed to, I think 4 of his subjects claimed to have seen God while they were under the influence of these magnetic fields, which is why the device got the name the God helmet. But he was also able to do things like turn off fear, like a switch, turn it on and off, and a whole host of other strange effects that were directly impacting the human brain. And so what is believed is that what was happening is that these magnetic fields were torquing these magnetite crystals in people's brains, and this is the physical mechanism by which it was working. And so it's clear that you could have this, we are in this highly magnetic environment. We talked about that area of Broke Leg Barrows where I had my own temporal displacement experience. Mm-hmm. And when you hold a compass close to the rocks out there, the compass torques. Like, it's clear as day. There's no question about it. So it's obviously a magnetically reactive area. So it begs the question, did I just get magnetically befuddled? Are people having these experiences? Are they local hallucinations in their brain? There's just some kind of magnetic thing that is wigging them out and causing them to have unreal perceptions. And it's an excellent question. It's the right question to ask. I don't think that it is fully a hallucination. And the reason why is we have many reports that are co-witnessed. 8 people see a UFO that scans them with a green laser. Or, a couple both see glowing orbs flying above the river while they're driving down Highway 14. And so you've got co-witnessed events. And so it's really hard for there to be a hallucination that jumps brains. We also have photographic evidence. I've taken pictures of orbs myself. We have many folks have submitted pictures of what appear to be UFOs. And so hallucinations, you can't take pictures of. They're not a real thing. So, if they're local to your brain, you can't do that. We have tons of Sasquatch footprints out here. And so a hallucination can't leave footprints, and it can't leave hair samples behind either. And so all of those things seem to indicate that there's some interplay between these magnetic fields that we have out here and actual physical phenomenon. The theory that I have about it is that, so think about a radio station. If in your car, your radio station was permanently stuck on country music, and every time you hopped in your car, you heard country music, and you're like, okay, reality includes country music. That's just how it works. But of course, there are all kinds of radio signals passing through at all times. There's a rock and roll station, there's a talk radio station, there's a classical music station. Those are all present in the environment, but your tuner is only set to country music, and so that's all you ever hear. Well, if something comes in and influences your electromagnetic tuner and changes the channel, suddenly your world looks the same as it always does, except now instead of having country music, it's got classical music or it's got rock and roll music. And so what I think is happening is that our tuners are getting adjusted. When you're out here in the gorge, I think that we're very geologically active. In fact, Mount Adams just this last month had 180% increase in earthquake activity under the mountain over normal conditions.
Wow.
And so this is a living landscape, and there are enormous tectonic pressures pressurizing a lot of these magnetic substrates. We have a ton of lava, and basalt and things like that have unique magnetic signatures in them. And then, of course, we've got the auroras going on, which is from our sun, these electromagnetic forces that are influencing the Earth's magnetosphere. And so when you combine all those forces together, I think what happens here in the gorge is that you are more likely to have your tuner adjusted. And when your tuner adjusted, you have these uncommon experiences. It's my best working theory. I think that's what's going on too, because of the fact that you're obviously getting some kind of frequency that's adjusting your brain activity, whatever it may be. The blood flow is different. Everything that comes with that, you're getting it adjusted. So you're going to be experiencing a lot of different things that maybe you can't explain. But it's very strange to me how everybody seems to keep describing the same thing. Like, I have yet to hear people that talk about experiencing these sorts of things in these areas, and they say, like, I saw a Care Bear running across the field. I saw this big unicorn flying through. It always seems to be the same kinds of reports of the same kinds of things. And then even like saying feeling a presence, feeling something that's there, something that's out of our normal perception. Yeah,
it seems like this stuff we can actually see it and experience it once we're attuned to it, but in a normal circumstance we're kind of not. And it's like that with everything. It's like that with everything. No matter what you think about it, it's the same thing. Like, you eat something, you feel great. You eat another thing, you feel horrible. You hear a certain kind of sound that is inspiring or soothing, or it puts some emotion into you. There's all these kinds of things we experience all the time, and they've become normal to us, that we emotionally change. Our perceptions will change. Our moods will change. But then when it comes to this kind of thing, which has been scientifically proven already, that EMF has a very strong influence on how we see the world, perceive the world, etc. And yet there's so many people who kind of just go, oh, it's probably just some kind of hallucination.
Yeah. And, there is a strong desire to normalize, right? And there's a good reason to do that. Like, life is hard enough without, giant black cats or UFOs or all that other kind of stuff coming in. And so it is so much more comfortable to say, it was probably something, or I was seeing things, or whatever.
Wouldn't it be so much better to just accept it?
Well, that's kind of the approach we took in the store, was like, well, wait a minute. Let's not instantly jump to normalizing. And some people, like, they get like violent, like angry if you don't allow them to normalize it. And that's their own defense mechanisms. And I wouldn't deny anyone that. It's a very human emotion to be, to want your world to be consistent, to not have to deal with anomalous data, right? And so it's like I said, it's a very human reaction. It's a very normal reaction. But for those of us who are intellectually curious, or find the world fascinating, or who take delight in the idea that there are things that we haven't discovered yet, that there are still wonders that we don't understand, and the deliciousness of diving into those mysteries and trying to understand them and bring them into the light, like, to me, that's the most exciting and fun thing about what's going on at our store, is that we made a conscious choice that we weren't going to sweep these things under the rug. We weren't going to pretend like they were a mistake or a drug-induced encounter, or you were drunk, or you were stupid, or you were crazy, or you're a liar, or you're a hoaxer, or all those other kind of things. And for sure, there are people that have come into my store, and it's clear to me, oh, this person has got a mental health issue, right? Or there are other people who sign their reports, see more butts, and it's like, okay, you're having a little bit of fun, and no harm, no foul. Like, I'm not, there's no point in me, getting worked up about it. If someone thinks it's fun, and well, great, more power to them. But the vast majority, and I'm talking easily 98% of the reports we have, are ordinary people who've had an extraordinary experience, and there is nowhere that they can go to talk about it. Their family, laughs at them or thinks they're crazy. Their friends don't want to hear about it. Their coworkers don't want to hear about it. And, I've had senior law enforcement officials who've come to me, and local leaders, and they have confided in me, and they've asked me to not use their names because they know that it'll have severe negative impacts.
Yeah, the stigma behind it. Yep.
And part of what I'm trying to do is to be a champion for these witnesses. I've got broad shoulders. We talked last time that I am an infantry veteran and a former wildland forest firefighter and a search and rescue EMT. And I don't mind carrying the weight. I've already taken the plunge and said, yep, I'll be the guy that will take your slings and arrows and your ridicule and your laughter, and I will represent, to the best of my ability, these witnesses, and try to validate some of their experiences, and also to be a spokesperson to say they're not crazy. They're just an ordinary person who's had an extraordinary experience. And just because it's not within your, you haven't had the same experience, doesn't mean that it's not real.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I mean, just the amount of experiences that have come your way. These aren't people who are coming in, they're just reporting, like, one time in New York, I saw something.
Mm-hmm.
These are people that are reporting things in your area.
Yeah,
and
exactly.
you said over 360 reports?
Yes.
What's the time period for that?
So we have had a reporting program running for about 3 years. And just so people get a sense, we're talking about an area that's about 80 miles long. So that's the section of the river that's known as the Gorge. And then we extend from Mount Adams in the north so that's in Washington State, to Mount Hood in Oregon State. So that's about a 50-mile span between those two mountains. So we're talking about an area that's probably 80 miles long and 50 miles wide. And the population density is approximately 10 people per square mile. But when you get into the wilderness areas, it's like 0 people per square mile. And it is a vast, vast, rugged wilderness. It's one of the last true, like, expedition-worthy type of wilderness areas left in North America. And so the reports, like we had talked about the APCAT last time. For your listeners who didn't tune in, we've had well over 120 reports of this enormous Black Panther-like creature. Everyone who sees it describes it as a very muscular cat with black fur and a long tail. But half of those folks say that it is enormous in size, 4 to 5 feet tall at the shoulder, weighing between 900 and 1,300 pounds.
Could it possibly be a black bear, or are they?
No,
there's no way.
Yeah, the thing that I always look for is this tail, and black bears don't have a long tail. Oftentimes, the other thing that's really clear is that it's got a cat-like body and cat-like movements, right? And so we hear a lot of these reports that talk about that. And then a handful of the reports, and this is a really, like, I still am trying to figure out how this data fits into the overall data set. A handful of reports, less than 10%, say that the creature has a face that looks like a monkey. And to be specific about what that means, there's no hair on its face. It's got a leathery face. Its eyes are intelligent and ape-like, and its snout is shorter. And so think of the difference between like a German Shepherd and a pug dog, right? And you can imagine that it's easier to think of a pug dog looking more like a human than a German Shepherd because of the long nose. And so that is sort of the core characteristics. It has to be black, it has to be cat-like, it has to have a long tail for me to count it as an ape cat report. And we call it the Klickitat ape cat because it was first discovered in Klickitat County. And the very first report that I received was of this monkey-like visage. And so hence the name, the ape cat. Now, what's amazing about it, so you could say, so we got one report in the store. It was extraordinary. I told my employees about it. One of my employees told me that they had actually seen it. So to me, this was highly credible. We started putting out radio ads and flyers at trailheads, and then reports started flooding in. And so that's probably because we were specifically asking, has anyone seen this thing? Might be why we have so many reports about it. But even now, like I've got a 4x4 old FJ Cruiser that I've rigged up as a paranormal investigation vehicle, and it's got logos on it, and all kinds of gear and everything. And so I'll drive that around, and like I'll take it into Les Schwab to get new tires on the rig, and the gal behind the counter will say, "Hey, what's going on with your car? It's got this logo with a big cat." And I said, "Well, we've had reports about this big black cat." And she'll say, "Oh my God, yeah, I saw that thing myself when I was 12 years old out in Doofer." And so what I'm finding is that even people who aren't coming into our store, if they hear about what I'm researching, they volunteer, and they're kind of surprised, like, "Oh wow, I didn't know that it was." They think oftentimes that it's like a black cougar, but there's no such thing as a black cougar. That is not a thing that's recognized by science. And the other thing is that the size. There is one. So basically, a cougar might be 2 feet tall at the shoulder. Tiger is getting close to 3 feet tall at the shoulder, and tiger is currently the biggest land cat. And then our ape cat is 4 to 5 feet tall at the shoulder. So it's orders of magnitude bigger than the largest living cat recognized by science. There is a creature in the fossil record. It was alive here in Washington State during the Ice Age. 10,000 years ago, it's believed to have gone extinct. It's a North American lion. Scientific name is Panthera atrox. I have a replica skull of it in my store, and this creature matched the size and weight of the creature that people are reporting. And so, it is 100% biologically possible for a cat the size of the one that people are seeing and reporting in my store to exist. It did exist. It had existed alongside human beings, and it existed here. So the idea that it's impossible is scientifically untrue. What's interesting about this Panthera atrox, they have found scores of skeletons, many of them in the La Brea tar pits down in California. And so they understand this creature's biology pretty well. One of the things that they know about it is that it was sexually dimorphic, meaning the females were much smaller than the males. And it's an interesting artifact of our data that about half the reports say that it's enormous, and the other half say it's, seems like it's just a little bit bigger than a cougar. And that's consistent with what this biological creature actually, how it existed. 50% of the population larger than the other 50%. We've had reports that go back all the way to 1968 about this creature. And we also have reports that people have seen it with cubs, so younglings, kittens. And so we know that normally cats have a lifespan of about 15, maybe 20 years. And if we have reports going all the way back to 1968, we obviously have some type of reproducing population out here. So it's a really fascinating mystery, and one that it's like become kind of my focus because I had never heard anything like it before. Lots of interesting theories about where it may have come from. My favorite, and we talked about this extensively last time, is just upriver from us is this Hanford nuclear site. It was part of the Manhattan Project. Mm-hmm. And they had an enormous animal testing program during the Cold War. And we have interviews with scientists who work out there that say that they were confirm 100%, no question about it, were conducting bizarre experiments on apex predators. And those predators escaped and they couldn't recapture them. And we think that these cats may have been a part of that program. So it's really, like I said, a fascinating tale. Interestingly, since the last time we talked, I've been digging into more of the reports from the Hanford site. So Hanford was a part of the Manhattan Project. It closed down in the 1980s. It is currently the country's, in fact, North America's most expensive, biggest cleanup site. Like, not only is there nuclear contamination there, there's tons of chemical contamination. And so it is by far the nastiest, most polluted place in North America. And they were
where is that located specifically?
It's just upriver from us. If by the crow, as the crow flies, it's less than 100 miles, but it is right on the Columbia River. And for a big cat like that, we're talking jaguars and cougars are known to travel 25 miles in a day easily. So the notion that they could get over here is almost a certainty. But I uncovered, so they have, once it closed down in the 1980s when the Cold War ended, the National Park Service took it over as part of our national history. And they conducted hundreds of interviews with the people who worked there. And that's where I learned about a lot of these crazy experiments they're doing. Well, recently, since the last time we talked, I had covered this interview by a guy named Edward Milliman, and he was a lab tech out there. And he tells this story that involves like ninja monkeys and purple flamed explosions and like the craziest stuff. And it was his daily job. And he actually, no kidding, 100% worked for a Nazi there. So his boss was a scientist who had emigrated from Germany, sometime after World War II had ended. But this kid was in the Hitler Youth. His dad was in the SS. He was trained as a German fighter pilot. He got shot down over Soviet Russia and made his way back to German-friendly lines, and then eventually emigrated to America and became a part of the Hanford Animal Testing Program. And
wouldn't be the first time America's
no kidding,
hired
right?
a bunch of Nazis.
And so I was listening to this interview, and the guy's like telling stories like, one of your coworkers laughing it up and listen to this hilarious thing that happened. So this Nazi scientist was doing dental implants on these super strong, super smart macaque monkeys, right? And Edward says that these things are so strong that he watched one pull a chained eye bolt out of a cement wall. Like, they were insane.
My Lord.
And these creatures like 2 to 3 feet tall. Like, they're not big, right? And they were wicked smart. And they had in this one experiment where they were putting like weird teeth implants into them. I don't fully understand what the hell was going on with that. But anyway, there were 4 of them, 3 males, 1 female, and then one of those males was an alpha. And they were so dangerous that whenever you went into the monkey room, there was a guy standing behind a glass, like a bulletproof glass panel, to watch you to make sure nothing bad happened, and so he could go in there and grab you or call security in case something happened. And so he had this coworker, and the story is actually, he was joking about it. It's a pretty funny story, but it's horrifying when you understand like what the hell was going on. So there was this coworker named Dan, and they always said, Dan, you got to be careful when you go in there. These monkeys will grab you and you'll be sorry. But Dan was kind of an asshole, and he would go in there and kick their cages and wrap their fingers if they were holding onto the cages and stuff like that. Like classic, like, don't do this in the movie kind of stuff.
Yeah.
And so one day, Dan was in there, and the safety dude's behind the glass watching him, and he's hosing the floor out, and he drops the hose, and he bends down to pick it up. And so he had it in with this alpha monkey. Like, every time he would walk in, that alpha monkey would whip around and stick his ass up in the air at him. Like, it was like the monkey version of a FU. And so they kind of had a thing going on between them. And so Dan was in there, and he drops the hose, and he bends down to pick it up. And like a ninja, that macaque monkey rockets its hand out, grabs him by the coveralls, pulls him to the cage, takes his other hand, balls it up like a human fist, and like surgically through the cage bars, pow, paps him straight in the eye and knocks him out, right? So the safety dude had to run in there and grab him out. And They take him down to first aid. and so he shows back up and he's got this giant shiner, and quote, "It was the most beautiful black eye I'd ever seen in my life." Right? So this guy's got this huge black eye and he's all still grumbling. He's still pissed off about these monkeys. And like, Dan, we warned you. It's really critical that you stay safe and you don't get too close. You've already got a reputation, you already got a thing going on. Dan's like, yeah, whatever. Stupid monkeys. So he's in there another day and he gets, again, too close to the cage, and that alpha shoots his head out like a ninja, grabs him by the hair, and, quote, ka-chings his head into the cage and knocks him out again. So the safety dude has to go in there, grabs him out, takes him to first aid, drags back. So now Dan shows up. He's got this big shiner that's turning green. He's got his head bandaged up and stitches in his head. And he's not taking any chances, right? So Dan gets this 6-foot-long galvanized pole. And his task was he had to go in and check the water nipple. So the idea was he would put that water nipple in there and like test it and see if the water was still working. And he's like, ha, I'm 6 feet away. You can't get me. And so he goes up to the female monkey first, and she's smart enough. Like, she guides it right to the nipple and, does it on the thing and gives him an nod like, yep, it's working. And the other monkeys are watching like, oh, okay, I see what's going on. And so he goes to the next monkey, works out, and that alpha monkey's strumming his chin. And the safety dude says, I knew exactly what was going to happen. And so he winds up, last when he gets over to that alpha monkey, and he gingerly sticks that pole into the cage. And then with lightning reflexes, that monkey snatches the pole out of his hand, woofs it into his belly. Dan buckles over. Then the monkey takes that pole, sticks it on the crossbar of the cage, gets it under his chin, and then reefs down on it, hits him on the chin, flips him over, and knocks him out for a third time. And the safety dude said, I was laughing so hard, I had to crawl in there to get him out. And so he eventually drags Dan out. He goes down to first aid. He comes back, stitches on the chin, bandage on the head, shiner on the face. And they're like, Dan, we can't let you work with these monkeys anymore. They're killing you. And they harassed him mercilessly for weeks. And eventually he just retired and never came back. So and so there's this guy. And if you go to YouTube and you look up Edward Milliman Hanford, you will see this interview for yourself. And the stuff they were doing was even crazier than that. But like, that was every day at work at the Hanford nuclear site, messing with super strong, super smart monkeys with dental implants that were beating up the lab.
Was that the official title of the place too? Was that it was a nuclear site?
Yeah. So during World War II, when they spun up the Manhattan Project, everyone knows that Oppenheimer and his physicists were down in Los Alamos, but they needed a remote site that had cooling water, plenty of electricity, and it was far enough away from the coast that it couldn't be easily bombed, and it was remote enough that you could evict anyone who lived there. And so they chose Hanford, Washington, because it had the Columbia River, and it had this Grand Coulee Dam that had just been put in a decade before. And so it had everything they need, and there they put the reactors that forged the plutonium for the nuclear weapons. And so the first industrial scale nuclear reactors were at Hanford. The first plutonium created for nuclear weapons, in fact, the Trinity test plutonium came from Hanford, and the Nagasaki bomb plutonium came from Hanford. And so obviously we won the war, and then the Cold War started, and this place went into overdrive, and they built 9 nuclear reactors out there, and they produced enough plutonium to fuel 60,000 nuclear weapons. And so they called the place the Apocalypse Factory, because it is like where the fuel for the bombs that would end the world came from. And from the beginning, from day one, they had an animal testing laboratory out there. And then in the Cold War, that animal testing laboratory grew to be able to house over 1,000 large animals at a time. The only reason why I found out about it was kind of like one of those little secrets about it. But I found this weird newspaper article that during the cleanup process, they found buried in the desert a boxcar filled with the half-burned carcasses of radioactive animals. And they're like, oh, what the hell is this? And so that's when I started poking around and trying to figure out, well, what the hell was there a boxcar filled with radioactive animal carcasses doing out there in the middle of the desert? And then that's when, I uncovered all this information and started looking into these interviews and stuff like that. But just a wild, wild time. And the things that they were doing out there, things they're doing today. So it's now part of the Pacific Northwest National Laboratory. And there's a thing out there called the LIGO. It stands for the Laser Interferometer Gravitational Observatory. And in the desert, there are these two perpendicular tubes, and they extend for 2 miles each out into the desert. And there are these hypersensitive measuring devices. And what they are looking for is anomalies in the space-time continuum. I'm not kidding you. It is the first paragraph of their website. And a week after they turned the thing on, they found anomalies in the space-time continuum. So they are doing crazy, crazy science out there. And it is right in our backyard. And what's even crazier, so remember we talked about Kenneth Arnold, June of 1947. Kenneth Arnold sees UFOs. America falls in love with UFOs. And everyone thinks that's the first official UFO sighting in America. There's a few others, but it turns out, so Hanford goes live in September of 1944. And then they deliver their first plutonium to Oppenheimer in February of 1945. But in January of 1945, from the Pasco Naval Air Station, which is just a few miles south of the Hanford site, these F-6F Hellcat Navy fighter planes get scrambled to intercept a glowing object hovering over the nuclear reactor, right? So this is 2 years before the Kenneth Arnold sighting, and they are scrambling naval fighter planes to intercept UFOs. Well, they were not able to catch at that time. The Trinity test occurs in July of 1945. In that same month of July of 1945, there are accounts of 12 F-6F Hellcat fighter planes getting scrambled from the Pasco Naval Air Base to intercept another UFO over Hanford. And the pilots are reporting that the thing is as large as 3 aircraft carriers combined. And these planes had an operating ceiling of 37,000 feet. And this thing was, lifting beyond that. And the tower was telling them, we don't care if you burn out your engines. We don't care if you run out of fuel. Do whatever you can to intercept this thing and glide home if you have to. And none of them could catch it. And the plane started dropping like flies because they just couldn't operate at the altitude at which this thing was flying. And these are, the F-6F Hellcat was one of the best fighter planes, the naval fighter planes of World War II. It was designed to beat the Zeros, which were the best planes out there. So anyway, it's just a completely wild, all of the crazy things that you hear about, whether it be, UFOs or Bigfoot or this ape cat thing. It's compressed here in this place that is rife with magnetic anomalies and these strange phenomena occurring on these, within 30 miles of my store, there are 3 stratovolcanoes, including Mount St. Helens, which erupted in the 1980s. And so there's so much going on here, and it's really hard to say, is it a chicken or the egg thing? Is it because we were, plutonium was an element that didn't exist before Hanford, right? And here, for the first time on an industrial scale, we're building elements that don't exist. There's a lot of theories that our nuclear aspirations is what brought the attention of whatever flies UFOs around. And it started right here, in our backyard.
Well, that's the thing that I always thought too, was that we have globally, especially, more than enough nuclear weapons to destroy this planet probably several hundred, if not more times over.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't really make much sense unless you start thinking about, are they stockpiling because they discovered something during World War II that they need to perhaps be in defense of?
Exactly. What's astonishing is that so President Roosevelt started the Manhattan Project, and then he died before it was completed, and so Truman became president, and he didn't even know that the project was going on. That's how top secret it was. And prior to that, he was in Congress. Truman was in Congress, and he kept on trying to get information and audit this Hanford project or what all this money was being spent on, and they kept on rebuffing him and saying, nope, this is a war effort, you can't hear about it. And he was, as a congressman, pissed. Then he became vice president, and then Roosevelt died, and they informed about it, and he's like, I completely understand now why you didn't tell me, and it was the right decision not to tell me back then. And it's because you were talking about a situation where it could mean the end of the world if you didn't get it right. And so you can kind of excuse or explain or understand that incredible level of secrecy. Like a curious dude, sitting at home in Washington State, like I don't need to know that. And it would be irresponsible for them to have released that information to me. What we don't know is if there's a similar threat going on right now. Like if we have encountered races from other dimensions or from other, places extraterrestrially, and there is a threat at the same level, we don't have access to that information. And I'm not saying that it's right, but you can understand how a level of secrecy is a responsible decision from a certain point of view.
Yeah. I mean, the thing is, too, is this stuff is always so strange to me because it seems like the worst kept secret.
Yeah.
Like, it's just, I think there's so many instances where whether it's Sasquatch, whether it's ghosts, whether it's UFOs, whether it's aliens, whatever, you pick the paranormal type cover-up subject. And if every official across the world all of a sudden was like, you know what, this stuff is real. We've been trying to keep it secret for a while just to figure out how to deal with it and how to break it to everybody. But, here it is. I think most people would be like, yeah, figured.
Yeah. Well, it's weird. You talk about Sasquatch. So I was a soldier at Fort Lewis here in Washington State in the late 80s. And Mount St. Helens erupted in May of 1980. Right. And when I was on base, there were older soldiers that were telling stories about how when St. Helens erupted, they got put on a security detail and they were helping some other units who were doing animal carcass cleanup and stuff like that. And one of the groups was one that there was a pile of Sasquatch bodies that they were guarding, right? And they were eventually taken away in these Chinook helicopters. And during the security detail, they got into a deuce and a half truck and they drove to various caves around Mount St. Helens. And out of the back of the deuce and a half jumped a tall Sasquatch, which was communicating with one of the scientists. And he would go into the caves and holler, and they would either bring injured Sasquatch out of the cave or they'd bring the carcasses of dead Sasquatch out of these caves. And as a soldier, 19 years old on Fort Lewis, I was like, yeah, good story, bro, whatever. And it seemed fantastical and crazy, and this kind of story soldiers tell soldiers, right? And as I've been digging into this area here in the Gorge, and St. Helens is just a stone's throw away from us. It is literally, just 30 miles north of the Gorge. There was a document produced by the Army Corps of Engineers, I think in 1975, called the Washington Environmental Atlas. And on page 54 of the Washington Environmental Atlas, there's a whole entry on Sasquatch as one of the creatures that lives in Washington State. This is published 5 years before Mount St. Helens blew. And there's a map that shows areas of Sasquatch habitation. There are spots on Mount St. Helens. There are spots in the Gorge, and there are spots in Broke Lake Barrows, that area where I had my own weird displacement experience. And so here's an official government document, no question about it, for real. You can look it up. Washington Environmental Atlas, I think it's page 54, shows the Sasquatch in the map. And then on the eastern corner of Washington State is Fairchild Air Force Base. And out there, they have a SEER school. So when pilots get shot down, they have to survive, escape, evade, and return back home. And there's a course that they have set up to train pilots how to do that. And it's a world famous course. And they've got a training map of Washington State, and on it, it describes all the plants and animals. It says, these are the ones that are edible and everything else. And then it says, here are the dangerous plants and animals. And there are rattlesnakes and our orcas and our sharks and our bears. And on this map are also listed Sasquatch. So these are two official military documents, maps that are showing the government being aware of and communicating with its personnel that Sasquatch live here in Washington State, and they specifically know exactly where. And so, now here I am 30 years later after my military experience, and I'm reading these documents, and I'm wondering if those stories weren't BS that the other soldiers were telling me, because it is verified that there were infantry soldiers out there pulling security details, and now we have information that's showing us that these two things may be related, and I have got hundreds of reports of Sasquatch in this exact area. So like I said, it's there's a lot of pieces that seem to fit together, and like I said, part of the fun of it is sort of ferreting at all these details and following up on these witness reports and trying to make sense of it and having fun talking about it with people like you.
One thing I really want to ask you here, where there's like Faraday shielding that that Army infantry and all kinds of other military use to evade electromagnetic weapons being used upon them and things like that. There's clothing and shielding like that. Has anyone used anything along those lines in the Columbia River Gorge and still reported paranormal activity?
I don't think anyone has, at least not to my knowledge. And it's actually would be a really fun experiment to try. There's some areas where we have high concentrations of sightings and stuff like that, and that would be an interesting test to run.
Yeah, because I'd be very curious to see if there's any reports of people still experiencing something when it doesn't really point to electromagnetism kind of doing something with their perception.
Yeah, and like I said, there's another theory that some people have out here is that this is some type of crossroads, right? Because we do have a ton of reports of Sasquatch and UFOs and ape cats and stuff like that, but we also have a ton of reports of like weird one-offs things. Like we have a report of a yellow snake with red frills on the side of its head, so a normal 3-foot long snake. We have reports of this quadrupedal white shaggy furred creature that came up out of a forest ditch alongside of a road and kept pace with a car that was going 35 miles an hour, and then it sort of veered off, and it had no apparent head. We have stories about what the witnesses called devil dogs, but they assured me that they were not dogs of any kind. And these creatures were able to whistle, and they were approximately the size of a Great Dane, but they had no hair, and they were gray in color. And a pack of them sort of surrounded their camp and seemed to be frightened off by sunlight. We have reports from actually one of my employees who was driving through the desert at the wee hours of the morning, like 1:30, 2 o'clock, and he saw standing on the side of the road a very thin humanoid, bipedal with arms and a head, no taller than the hood of his car, that seemed to have a head that looked like a praying mantis. And when he drove by it, his cell phone went crazy and the lights in the center console of his car went out. And then he got a couple hundred yards down the road and he started feeling dizzy and unwell. And so there's and I could go on and on about, we have this unusually high concentration of what we call darklings. So these are normal creatures that have black fur. So like wild rabbits with black fur, or bobcats with black fur, or, creatures that normally don't have black fur are expressing their melanin here. And of course there's the Klickitat ape cat. And so it's weird that there are this whole really vast array of different kinds of phenomenon that people are reporting. And whether that's because this is some type of crossroads or gateway or something like that, or maybe what happened at Hanford cracked something open, or who knows what.
Even some kind of experimentation done on animals, it feels like
yeah,
trying to figure out a way to create this kind of like a creature that can blend into the shadow.
Mm-hmm.
And if you can create this sort of thing, if you can control something like a panther,
Yeah.
With the intelligence of an ape or whatever it is. It just sounds like mad science. You know, it's funny that people get ridiculed if you're a scientist and you want to really take Sasquatch seriously or aliens seriously or anything like that seriously. But if you want to, do crazy mad science experiments on animals, if you want to crack open the space-time continuum, they're like, here's a grant.
I guess it's just all about PR at that point, right? But, and there have been some real studies out here. Like, it was discovered that there was a scientist whose job it was to track radioactive rabbit poop. The rabbits out at Hanford, because it's a 600 square mile area, would snuggle up next to the nuclear waste barrels because they were warm, and they would get irradiated, and then they would hop around and they would leave literally radioactively hot bunny droppings in a miles wide range. The problem with that is that things like coyotes and cougars and bears and rattlesnakes would then catch those creatures and eat them. So they're eating radioactive animals, right? And who knows what was happening. I've talked to biologists who say that they were working out at Hanford and they have seen three-eyed rattlesnakes. And so, I don't think that there's any one answer that explains it all. Like, there's no master story.
It seems like a perfect storm of weirdness
out
there. I mean, holy smokes, man. You ever thought about moving?
Are you kidding? Like, I'm a huge Dungeons and Dragons nerd from way back, right? And this is like living in Dungeons and Dragons world. Like, I
like it from afar,
Yeah.
I like it because you're over there and you tell me about it, but I don't think I could live over there.
I'm the guy who owns the shop where you get your gear, right? You come in and you get your armor and your potions and everything. And then you go out and have these adventures and encounter all these strange beasts and strange phenomenon. And so, it's like I said, I can't tell you how rich and satisfying and compelling it is to be out here and to be entrusted with these people's stories. I mean, we had mentioned briefly the ghosts out here, but there's a town in the eastern half of the Gorge that was the end of the Oregon Trail. And so, people would come across from all across the country and they'd wind up there, and they had to make a decision about whether they'd turn their Conestoga wagon into a raft and float down the Columbia River to Portland, basically, or go over the mountains. And, thousands of people died. But this town, it's called the Dalles, was like a classic Old West town. They had, like a Chinatown with underground tunnels. They had public hangings, shootouts in the streets, river boats, saloon girls. Like, it was crazy. Like, it was, you get every penny's worth out of it in your Old West town out there. Well, we have so many ghost stories from this area. It is just like off the charts. And I pulled my car up to Jack in the Box and to get my lunch one day. And the kid in the window looked at my car and said, "Oh, what do you do?" I said, "Yeah, well, we research paranormal stuff here in the Gorge." He said, "Oh my God, my dad works at the Napa Auto Parts store. It used to be a Model T factory, and that place is haunted as shit. You should go check it out." And I did, and then we found some stuff. And so I put up a post on our Facebook page and said, "Hey, we have reports of ghost activity in the old Napa Auto Parts building." And then I posted that in that town's Facebook community page. And that thing blew up, and people who worked there were posting videos of things floating around in the basement. Like, you can literally see things moving around in the basement and making right-hand turns and flying in other directions. And the owners chimed in and said, "Yep, it's crazy haunted out here." And this whole raft of ghost stories. Some of them were obviously wonderful creative writing pieces. But that's just one example where, if I, set a spark, the whole place will catch on fire with stories. There's this one place, it's right now a community college. But if you went and had a recipe for how to create a haunted place, this has it all. Basically, in the community college, in the bookstore, people see books falling off the shelves. There's an elevator, and people press the top floor, and they'll get sent to the basement. There's people hear jangling keys. There's a whole series of really classic ghostly experiences that people happen. Well, it turns out that back in the 1920s, this building was a tuberculosis hospital that had a refrigerated morgue in the basement. And so that was its first incarnation.
It always is.
But then, once they sort of figured out tuberculosis, and they didn't have as much use for it, it was converted into an asylum for the non-criminally insane. Awesome, right? Then it became like a Baptist retreat center for a few years, and then it became the community college, and now it's haunted as crap.
That is the evolution. I just want to say I've seen so many ghost shows and so much research on like these kind of TV hospitals. That's like the evolution for 90% of them.
Right? What's even better is literally right next door to the Pioneer Cemetery, and we've got reports of this strange little girl who has a broken leg, and people see her and they go to try to help her, and then she vanishes. And there are stories of people hearing like the sound of a horse-drawn carriage, and there's no carriage out there. Well, the road that they recently put in to get up there, it's called Scenic Drive. You can see Mount Adams from it. In order to put in that road, they had to transplant the Hebrew cemetery and the Indian cemetery. And so, like, not only do they have like all the tuberculosis, they have moved cemeteries. Like, what could possibly go wrong?
Talk about doing everything wrong that you could do wrong.
Oh my God! There's this other place in town called Clock Tower Ales, and it used to be like the courthouse and jail back when it was an old West town, and it was the site of the last public hanging in Oregon, right? And there's like all these crazy metal doors, and like the employees there like get locked into weird places, and alarms go off that they didn't know existed, and they hear all kinds of disembodied voices. So after it was the courthouse, it then became a morgue where they basically a funeral home. And then after that, it became a Freemason temple. And now it's the Clock Tower Ales restaurant. And so like the history is this layered upon itself, and like these psychic echoes seem to be like all over the place out there. And like I said, it almost sometimes feels fake to me that we have so much crap going on here. It's just like this Disneyland of weird shit. And like I said, it's just really cool to be sort of ground zero and getting to hear all these stories and getting to check it out. So anyway,
James, when you're talking about this stuff, all I can think is this just seems like a bad idea. Everything that you just said, like with some of these areas, like doing these things, it seems like a bad idea. Do you honestly think that they're trying to conjure something?
I don't know. I mean, those Freemasons always freak me out. I'll be honest with you. Like,
because
who knows what those jokers are up to?
It just seems like, you're doing all these things. There's a lot of bad energy here already.
Yeah.
Instead of kind of leveling the place, doing some kind of ritual to cleanse it or whatever.
Yeah.
It just kind of turns into, let's shovel more crap on it. Let's get it worse.
Yeah. I mean, but you gotta understand, like, as they're doing that, they don't have like the benefit we do of like, like all of the horror
common
movies.
sense. It must be
like, when they converted it to an insane asylum, they Poltergeist had not yet been released, and so like a lot of the stuff that seems obvious to us, like what a bad idea it was, is mostly from our movie knowledge from childhood, which for me started in like the 80s, and so
it feels like that's the kind of thing where if you're not nuts, you're gonna be nuts.
Yeah,
and there's a lot of horrible things that went on in those asylums. Mm-hmm. And a lot of it seemed like open range to do experimentation upon people and to get crazy
they were doing
with
that
techniques and whatever. But
what is that electroshock therapy where they were lobotomizing people? Like that's what they were doing out there. And
because it was Frances Farmer, right? Wasn't she out there in Washington?
I can't say for sure if she was at this facility or not, but I do know that they were experimenting with LSD, electroshock therapy, and lobotomies at this facility. It's just crazy.
It's crazy. There's so much stuff, man. Well, we're well over the hour. I'm going to only take one question here. Comics for Life and it's been great. I'm not complaining. Comics for Life has a good question here. What's the strangest thing you personally have encountered that kind of spooked you?
Well, so I may have seen the ape cat from a distance swimming in a lake. And at the time, we hadn't had any reports yet. We hadn't really even started our reporting program. And I saw an enormous black-furred creature. It was larger than a man, but smaller than a car, swimming in a desert lake. And it was able to submerge for up to 5 minutes and then come back up to the surface. And I couldn't figure out what it was. I mean, the only creatures that big are like elk or bear, but they don't submerge. And at the point, I was just like, I don't know what that is. That was kind of weird, but not too crazy. I have seen glowing orbs. My wife and I have seen them together. I even captured a picture of one. And that was interesting, but it didn't like freak me out. The thing that freaked me out was that time-space displacement experience I had in the old lava bed. And we talked about that extensively, I think, in our last visit. Basically, I was out there, and I have been doing professional land navigation for 35 years with the Army and search and rescue and firefighting and everything. And so I am one of the most competent and trained professionals in terms of doing that. And I don't get lost, and I know what I'm about in the wilderness. If I don't, people die. And so it's something I take very seriously. And I'm not being immodest that I'm really good at it because of all the training and experience I have in it. I was out there, and I had this experience where I thought I was in one place and I lost 2 hours, and I found myself in a new place, or I thought was a new place. And then, like, waking up from a dream, I realized it was a place that I had already been, and I had no idea how I got there. I thought that I was over 800 yards away from where I actually had ended up, and that was really disconcerting to me. I mean, anyone else getting lost in the woods, it might be just chalked up to a mistake, but for me, with the experience that I've had and the skills that I deploy whenever I'm in the wilderness, and just the complete befuddlement of my brain, I have never experienced anything like that was so flamboozling. Like, I just could not understand how I had gotten to where I was, and how the time had disappeared for me, and how I was for 5 minutes sitting in a place that I had already been in and studied extensively, and I didn't even recognize it.
Would you ever be open to going under hypnosis to see if you can retrieve any kind of memory you might have lost?
It'd really be kind of interesting. But it was just, that by far. And it was also exciting because I realized, wow, I've been hearing all these reports about people having these like truly bizarre experiences, and here I was in the middle of one. And it was weird, but it was also kind of cool. I mean, I wasn't harmed in any way, and if something had moved me there, they did it in the most benevolent way possible. But it threw me for a loop.
I've got one final question for you I didn't get a chance to ask the last time you were here. Given all of the strange activity in the region, have you had what you would classify as strange lucid dreams?
I have had strange lucid dreams. I've had precognitive dreams, but they didn't. I can't say that they happened here. I've had them previously in my life, and when I lived in another place. When I was a soldier.
Interesting. I wonder if that has something to do with it too. Those kind of because you've heard it for forever. It's such a cliche where people have these kinds of precognitive premonition type experiences, and then something really bad, like a natural disaster, happens. I wonder if it's because of like that geologic activity ramping up, and maybe they're getting a glimpse of something.
For me, my precognitive experience, it basically had set up. I dreamed that I was in this meeting with one of my sergeants and with a couple other soldiers, and they were asking questions. And because I had the dream, 2 days later, the experience actually unfolded. And because I had the dream, I knew what questions were going to be asked, and I was prepared to answer those questions. And it was fascinating to me. Like, once you have an experience that clear and that undeniable, it's like, oh, this is what I dreamed, and he's going to ask me this. And then he asked me it. And in fact, when I had the dream, I woke up and think, like, how would I answer that question? So I had a couple of days to sort of plan it, and just like randomly, like, okay, that was weird, but what would I do? And then it came true, and I was like, wow, there's no denying that was a precognitive dream. Like, it was very clear to me. So yeah, it's a strange thing.
Yeah, absolutely, man. Well, James, thank you so much for being on here again today. This was fascinating.
I appreciate you indulging me, because I know once I get going, sometimes I don't stop. And
it's great.
I really enjoy the time we spend together. So thank you for having me on.
Oh, no problem. I'd love to have you come on again, because there's always something we didn't get to, and there's always more things that develop by the time you're coming on back again in a couple months. So yeah, that'd be great to have you come on again in sometime in early 2025, and we can see what happens. What's the winter usually like, I guess, for out there? Do you notice the paranormal activity? Does it ramp up? Does it decrease? How does that usually go?
Well, the Gorge is, like I said, a true wilderness area, and sometimes we get socked in and no one can go anywhere, or you're on a snowmobile or snowshoes if you're going to get out of the house. And so we have fewer reports typically happen just because there's fewer people out in the woods. But it's also a really good time to track Bigfoot and other creatures leave footprints.
Very nice. All right. Well, everybody, thank you guys so much for being in the chat tonight. This was a great one. I hope you guys enjoyed it. I absolutely did. And James, thank you so much again, man. This was great. Before we go, where can they find you? Anything you want to plug? Anything like that?
The best thing is go to our website, margiesoutdoorstore.com or margiesoutdoor.com. Both will get you to the same place. We try to put up reports on our Facebook page, and we put out some stuff on our YouTube channel. It's mixed in with some of our store marketing stuff. But those are really the best places. We're working on getting some other stuff, trying to organize a podcast and some other stuff. But there always seems like there's something pulling me in another direction. So, but that's where we announce it all. So margiesoutdoorstore.com, and then Margie's Outdoor Store on Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube.
Fantastic. All right, everybody. I'll see you guys again soon. Everybody, until then, have a wonderful night and an even better tomorrow. Thank you, guys. See you soon. All right. Thank you.